Okay, welcome to the property prescription. Today we're going to talk about it was probably a follow-on effect from our sort of last episode that we did about mental health and maybe getting a little bit deeper into that. So today's topic, we're going to talk about the psychology of debt and why doctors oversave. Now, you've got a couple of stories that you can actually resonate with.
I love talking about this stuff because I think people don't. I think on one point people do talk about money a lot, especially in the immigrant families, such as myself. But on the other hand, they don't have the skills or the data or the support to actually make money work for them. And there's a lot of misconceptions. There's a lot of sort of leftovers from the immigrant days. So I'll give you an example. My parents moved to Australia when I was a kid, and they're first-generation immigrants. And my mum grew up, originally was quite wealthy as a child. And then the Cultural Revolution, I'm not sure if you're aware of the Cultural Revolution, and most of that money was taken away. And she essentially had a very different lifestyle. So it went from relatively comfortable to relatively poor. And her idea in her head is that money needs to be sort of saved away because it could be taken away at any moment. So if she was extremely conservative, she's very scared of debt. She's very scared of the government. She's very scared of pretty much everyone except for herself, which is why she put money under the mattress, because that's for her where the safe place is. So you hide it. My dad is a bit of a wild person. He's he's a bit of a loose cannon. He was already kind of poor from the beginning, so he's never suffered through that change in wealth what my mum had. So he had different levels of risk. But for him, it was more like he was more into gambling things, right? He didn't really wanted to wait for money to come. He wasn't interested in investing. He would be like, oh, look at Bitcoin. Let's put some money in, and then 2 months later, you become a millionaire. So that's what he's more interested in. So I grew up with sort of two extremes.
So high risk and conservative.
Yeah.
In
and
one
then
family.
So I'm trying to like navigate in the middle. And because I didn't grow up with financial literacy, neither my parents are financial literate, I had to learn all this stuff essentially, mainly from my wife, because she grew up in a financial literate family. But as an immigrant, it was very tough because that's just not something we were taught. And all of my financial advice from my parents are just their personal experience from their past. And both are very bad. One is too high risk and one is no risk at all.
Correct. And I think from our end, like I find a lot of doctors often make financial decisions that feel safe, but they're actually driven by emotion.
Yeah.
And there's no strategy there.
That's exactly what my parents were going through. And most of my first 20, 25 years was like that because that's what I was taught. Like do what you feel was right instead of what was based on data, right?
Yeah, so I want to get into the mindset behind the behavior and why that sort of almost leads to missed opportunities. You know, it's actually understanding your risk tolerance and understanding sort of the opportunity cost of not making decisions. You know, we all know doctors earn good incomes, but I think a lot of our clients, some of them behave, you know, if they have one bad month, they think the whole world's going to fall apart and it's all, you know, sell. We've got to look at that asset. We've got to sell that down because the debt on our house is too great. But when you start educating about debt to income and actually there's good debt, there's bad debt, a lot of them want to pay down debt on their home as quickly as possible. That is the first goal from them. But there's probably better strategies to pay down debt and doing it methodical and have a strategy around that. But it's more around giving them comfort, you know. And then it's an education program that we run with our doctors, and it's been going for a long period of time. So, you know, there's a few examples with some of our sort of clients. You know, we've got a GP earning $350,000 who refuses to take on a $900,000 principal place of residence debt, despite having $600,000 in cash and a secure job. So that's example one. You know, example two is a surgeon with 1.2 million savings. So they got 1.2 mil just sitting in the bank, who rents for years because debt feels uncomfortable.
Yep.
Even though their income could comfortably service a mortgage for $4 to $6 million. A dual doctor sort of couple, they're earning $550 combined, who insist on they have to save a 50% deposit. Like, Phil, we don't want to go and do anything. We don't want to go and buy a house until we have a 50% deposit. And in our last episode, we talked about inflation, the opportunity cost of not investing or taking a position. So I think just because you're earning sort of a high income, it doesn't eliminate fear, doesn't eliminate that emotional sort of irrational thought process in terms of making the wrong decisions. I find it often amplifies it with, some of our particular surgeons and doctors, because I think some of our doctors that have had those conservative parents, they feel like they've got more to lose.
Yes. Yep.
And I think how do we explain that and have a conversation? And when we're sitting down with the doctor, when we have that first meeting, those are the sorts of topics that we often have a discussion around. Let's create the strategy. This doesn't happen to happen over 5 years. This is 20 to 30 years of actively managing your portfolio, and just be data driven, be completely unemotional when it comes to this thinking. And that's how we've obviously built these portfolios for our doctors for a long period of time. Why doctors fear non-deductible debt? Some of our doctors are comfortable with investment debt, but a lot of them get really, really concerned about having too much home loan debt. What are some of the things that go through your head, over the last year that we've been talking about?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned earlier that even though pretty much all doctors earn a decent salary, definitely above average, and because I grew up poor and seeing what my parents went through, I was like exactly like you said, I'm worried that I'll lose it all, even though the chance of that happening is pretty minimal. And so I was afraid, whether it's conscious or subconsciously, like I was afraid to be more and more risky because I don't want to go back to my previous life. I think that's what a lot of doctors are feeling as well. So that includes taking up a lot of debt for your mortgage, and just felt uncomfortable because it always feels like any moment you could go back to your...
Correct. Yeah. And it's not just with some of our doctors, it's with some of our other clients as well. It's that fear of almost failure, losing everything.
Yeah.
If there's another war, it's almost geopolitical, because a lot of our parents and grandparents were exposed to some pretty significant geopolitical sort of events that occurred around the world. And that's just set that sort of conservative, we're not taking risks, we're saving our cash.
Yeah, and in those situations, it made sense back then, I guess.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. I think it's really important that you do save for a rainy day, and you do have that sort of emergency fund sitting somewhere. But from my end, it's more around just educating around, making sure that this debt is manageable. You've got the income to do it. It will take time to build out, but it's almost providing that comfort and that ongoing. We find that we're often counsellors for a lot of our doctors. We're talking them through, not just their property journey, but life events and
it's a psychological block almost. So I mean, for the doctor, let's say the GP that has plenty of cash, like, what do you say to them? Is this like logic their way through it?
You just have to step it out. This is the strategy. These are the reasons. You probably need to listen in terms of their concerns, and then you've got to deconstruct in terms of why they should be taking another path. And I think once you educate them on that path, and you educate them that they're not taking on too much risk, they're actually taking on more risk by not doing anything. And then when you talk about inflation, cost of living, making sure that investments compound over time in the right investments, then they start getting comfortable. But it takes, to be really upfront, it takes us 5-6 years to finally build the trust of that particular doctor. They see the growth of the assets starting to occur, and they're like, okay, we know what Phil and the team are talking about. We understand the strategy. And then ideally after that, they just become unemotional, and, we'll call some of our clients, they're in surgery and we need a decision on a particular commercial property. And this is like a $3, $5, $10 million asset. And they'll just say, proceed. One word. But originally we've got to talk them through the investment, the why, the merits. And so they've got to understand the strategy. So I think the other one is we've got some why doctors fear non-deductible debt. We've got some examples. So a doctor happily takes a $1 million loan for an investment property, but refuses a $700,000 principal place of residence loan because they think it's bad debt.
Yeah, I mean, understand that. One is making you money, sort of.
Yep.
Another one is just sitting there.
Yeah. Another example that we had is a specialist who aggressively pays down their principal place of residence home loan debt at the expense of investing, missing out on years of compounding across other investments.
Yeah. I know that's exactly what my mum was like.
Yep.
Right? Because they first bought their house 25 years ago, or more than that, in Australia when we first immigrated here, with just a $20,000 deposit, because that's all you needed. And they bought a $180,000 home. And then my dad was so keen on getting some more investments in, but my mum was like, no, you're going to pay down the house. So we never got any other investments. But that house eventually went on to become like over $1 million.
Yeah.
So they still did well.
Yeah.
Excellent, because they rode the wave up. But in hindsight, like what could have happened was very different.
Correct. And it's understanding that risk tolerance in terms of, the beauty about property, you've got the ability to leverage. And provided you're leveraged within a reasonable amount, you've got the ability to build your wealth to a greater amount over the same holding period. We had a registrar who believes they must clear all their, I used to call it HEX debt, but help debt before buying a home. So she was just adamant, I've got to pay my debt down.
Yeah, that's the last debt you want to pay off.
Yep. Even though, the last point here is help is the cheapest debt they'll ever have.
Yeah.
So, if you can keep it there and you've got the ability to invest, just
Yeah. I try to pay as little as I can, just to eventually pay it off. But it is still hanging over your head.
It is.
It's just a psychological thing.
Just there. Yeah. It's there every year when you go and see your accountant, tax time. All my universities, HEX debt, that was there.
Yeah.
You just want to pay it down.
I do understand the logic side of it, but I also understand people's hesitation and anxiety. And that alone, I guess, is worth something. But if you can get rid of that, that's even better.
Yeah, so doctors are trained to make rational, evidence-based decisions at work, but money often triggers emotion.
Yeah.
It's always
a big one.
So some examples, this is what we get from our doc. I just want to feel safe, and it leads to holding $500,000 to $800,000 in cash. I don't want to owe the bank anything. I often get that a lot from doctors. It leads to delaying buying the home for years. I don't want to make a mistake. I just don't want to make a mistake. I get that all the time. Leads to analysis paralysis, and then nothing gets done. You procrastinate, nothing happens. Often it takes 6 to 12 months to eventually get those particular doctors to make a decision. So, so we see it all before, behavioral patterns, loss aversion, fear of losing money outweighs potential gains. That's a big one that I see. Anchoring, some doctors just get fixated on certain things. A lot of them, and a lot of our other clients also get fixated on interest rates. It's a big one. Interest rates are increased, or look at inflation. They don't look at the actual total return. If that investment is going to get you to that end point in a quicker time frame, don't worry about the small stuff. Confirmation bias, seeking advice that reinforces fear, the market will crash. I get a lot of that.
That's
everything's going to fall under, it's going to crash.
Yep, that's been happening for 150 years.
Yeah, and if we look at the growth of everyone's waiting for the crash, but what about those years spent not taking advantage of those opportunities? So even if it comes off 30%, you're still going to be well and truly ahead if you've invested well. So I think emotionally safe decisions are often financially harmful. I get that.
Yeah, I think the reason for a lot of this, we spoke about my immigrant experience, but as a doctor as well, you're taught to be conservative.
Yeah.
Most of the time.
Yes.
Because if you are a cowboy, people die.
Yes.
And that is a part of our psychology. So it's something, like money also is, as you said, it generates so much emotion, and that's an innate thing that we really have to you have to help tweak. To our listeners out there. Yeah. You have to sort of remove yourself from that. So what you were taught for medicine is not necessarily correct for finances in your life.
Correct. And I'm a big believer that we actually we need to introduce financial education into universities. It should be a subject, whether or not you're a doctor, whether or not you're doing all different types of topics. I really feel that we're not doing enough about it. And obviously it's good for us because we can obviously do the counselling and create the strategy. But
anyway, to everyone who's listening, I guess don't be scared.
Don't be scared.
Talk to the right people and work it through.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, I think we'll end it there. Thanks very much for another great episode of the Property Prescription, and
thanks for the counselling session.
Thanks, Tony. Cheers.